What makes The Wire so amazing is its level of authenticity.
It just told the truth. It kept it real.
I see them balls.
I covered urban politics for, a good 20 years. And The Wire was the most realistic and powerful thing that I had ever seen about the city.
The game is out there. It's either play or get played.
It's a show that basically tells you America is broken.
It's putting a mirror up in front of your face and saying, this is what you really look like.
I don't know that that's a message that a lot of people want to hear.
Season 5, David introduces the newsroom.
We have the newspaper with our existing world, Baltimore and crime and drugs.
And then you see this story unfold in the newsroom as it's unfolding in the street.
Well, I say that this is not only tragic, it is unforgivable.
There's so much going on in this world that Simon's created that it was time for a newspaper perspective on it.
This year, The Wire is about the diminishing power of the press.
The things that I loved about journalism are just slipping away.
It's a bad time for newspapers, as you all know.
The internet certainly has changed the industry.
At this rate, there won't be much to call a newspaper in 10 years.
There's some chance of printed newspapers becoming obsolete.
It is a crime, the way we cover crime and justice in this country.
If it bleeds, it leads.
If you keep people afraid, you can do with them whatever you want.
News in this country has become big business.
As David Simon always does, he has woven that in brilliantly with our existing world.
What this season is about is just how far you can go on a lie.
Action.
See today's paper?
Just sports.
You gotta check out the front page.
It's not very surprising that getting a front page story is the most important thing to most reporters. Not only is it the most prominent page in the newspaper, but it's also talked about constantly during the day.
What do you like for the front?
A feature on John Waters filming again in Baltimore could go out front if the art is good.
It's so important sometimes that people lose sight of the fact that there are good stories everywhere in the newspaper.
There are a million stories in the naked city. No! Today, you poor mooks only need to throw me 3 or 4.
Journalism has become kind of like politics. It's very much driven by market testing and polling and focus groups. We try to figure out what the readers want and then give it to them.
They say that. People want news, but they also want tabloids. People complain about the tabloids, but the only reason the tabloids are there is because people buy them. People. That's the last thing you should listen to when you want to know about something, is people.
There's more impediments to learning than a lack of materials or a dysfunctional bureaucracy.
But who's gonna read that?
Those folks who have the privilege of living in the bubble, they don't want to know about these troubles, and we, who have a responsibility in the media to tell them about it, we don't go there with them.
What the public wants, unfortunately, is the blonde who gets lost in Aruba rather than the daily grind of agony in the slums of the city.
Your piece took a bad bite there.
Alma does a story about a home invasion where 3 people are murdered. And her story gets cut down to 12 inches.
Detective, can I get a word? Anything on the suspects?
And it gets put into the middle of the paper. Alma's, outraged. How could this be? I mean, this is something that's really important. This is something that's going on in the city.
It's all about not really trusting the audience to figure things out. It's as if they believe that the public can't take on large issues.
No one's buying newspapers anymore. So what do newspapers do to increase circulation? Do they cover stories that no one wants to buy and read about? No. They start covering stories that are less important to our democracy.
Sensationalism, it's what catches people's eye. It's what grabs people's attention. The way in which journalism is rewarded is part of the problem. They give promotions for nailing some politician's pelt to the wall. But the ultimate act of reportage would be to really surround something that is endemic and complex, and to make it understandable so that more people could address themselves to solving that problem than ever before. And that never happens.
You don't need a lot of context to examine what goes on.
Really? I think you need a lot of context to seriously examine anything.
I think Scott is on the right track. We need to limit the scope, not get bogged down in details.
There is a disconnect between what the people at the home office who are running the newspaper chain care about, which is the bottom line, and the people who are still left in charge of the editorial side in these newsrooms. In their heart of hearts, they are at least still journalists, and they would like to have impact. They would like to go somewhere, pull a couple Pulitzers through the keyhole, and get offered a job to go somewhere bigger.
Where do you want to go?
Times or Post, where else?
I don't know. This is still a pretty good paper.
I looked upon Baltimore as my home and where I wanted to be a reporter at the Sun and grow old and end up bumming cigarettes from the younger reporters, when I was on the copy desk. The idea of going somewhere else didn't have as much appeal to me. And I met an awful lot of people coming through who were my bosses, who basically looked upon it as a way station, as a means of glossing their resumes and moving on.
Sun's a fine paper.
Before the cutbacks, maybe.
I think ambition in journalism is changing a lot right now. There used to be a fairly direct path for someone who was a newspaper reporter to rise from a small paper to a medium-sized paper to an important national paper to try to get on the front page. That can still happen, but when newspapers are shrinking, it's much harder to move from one newspaper to another.
How'd it go in Washington?
Buyer's market out there.
There's still a tremendous struggle among those of us who remain. We're like the survivors.
More and more ambitious people don't go into journalism in the first place, and when they do, their ambition might be more to get on TV.
Check it out, people. Our Metro desk has some national profile.
And this is what we do. As a reporter, you expect to be in harm's way at some points. It's what we do.
There's a belief that the true story is not enough. That, it's not going to be compelling enough. Got to, throw some spice on it somewhere.
If you want the story to fly, you got to give us something different. Give us something with a twist.
We'll see where it goes.
Good reporting, by and large, is based upon knowledge, information, and sources.
Terry, can you talk about it?
Checking your facts, making sure that you know what it is you're talking about before you go, and just passing on information you got from somebody else.
You feel comfortable telling me where you got that?
Not really, being a source.
The relationship of a journalist to his or her sources, it becomes a matter of family and trust and working.
Can I talk with you a minute?
You make an appointment? We talk much less than we should and we need to about the importance of ethics.
I'm spiking your lead. Look at that quote. It's a perfect quote. Best quote I could ever ask for. And that's my concern at this point.
And unless they're dealt with, you're not going to teach the next generation or the current generation that these ethics matter.
Gus, let's discuss this.
Actually, I did discuss it. I discussed it with the Metro editor, and he agrees. Now, the story's on the copy desk, and as a line editor working the story, I feel I've done my job. But we have a sourcing policy here, and I know it, and I do not feel comfortable bending the rules in this instance.
Making up quotes, improving quotes, making up characters. These kinds of practices, I think, used to be much more common.
Mr. Hannon, who are you? My name's Gus Haynes. I edited the story you featured in.
Then you're a fucking liar.
Today, there are things that are firing offenses that weren't even considered really bad in journalism 30 years ago.
As an editor, I need a little more to go on if I'm gonna fly this thing.
There's always been a little bit of fakery to journalism. There's always been some Barnum.
He's yanking your chain.
News, and when we think these are just the facts, it's completely subjective.
I don't know who told the newspaper that, but they were lying when they said it. Respectfully, sir, I don't know where this shit is coming from.
It all depends on what some editor decides is important at the last minute, and then we get it, and we think these are the facts of the world we live in, and there's nothing else.
Just finished your story. Good read. I'm putting it out front.
I thought we held ourselves up to
It's not an ideal situation, no.
I'm just saying that...
I think we're on terra firma here.
Makes me wonder how much of the news is actually the truth. How much of it is really accurate? Just the way things get misconstrued sometimes.
Well, there's no balance in what we choose to cover. And there's no depth even when we choose to cover a story that matters. We don't really tell the stories of poor inner city kids in the public schools.
Go ahead.
There's a balance problem, but there's also a problem when we do cover the stories that matter in covering them well.
I don't want some amorphous series detailing society's ills.
You can't have a newsroom that is full of elite privilege, and sometimes that includes, I'll say it, white men. You can't have just white men running the news business. You've got to have diversity in the newsrooms.
Wrong zip code. They're dead where it doesn't count. If they were white, murdered in Timonium, you'd have had 30 inches off the front.
When Katrina happened and they were saying, oh, the black looters, oh, the white foragers, and people got really upset, I was like, well, this is not new. This is America.
There is subjectivity in all decisions made, from the size of the headline, to the lead, to what facts are highlighted, to what's on the jump page.
You think that when you read the newspaper and when you watch TV, that everything you read and you see and you hear is gospel, and that's not the case.
The alliance he's making now is with one of the two people who left the room.
Well, David Simon was a police reporter, and we knew each other, from the newsroom. I do miss being a reporter.
The mayor, incensed by the commissioner's performance.
Having people read their own stuff and read other people's stuff. That was the joy of being in a newsroom every day.
Incensed seems over the top.
Well, nobody can mock your stuff better than another reporter.
Incensed is to inflame with wrath. Is this the mayor's state of mind?
And just nail you with a phrase.
Gulled, vexed, annoyed, safer still, displeased.
And the wit of the newsroom is something that I remember with great affection.
The details, Miss Gutierrez. The Baltimore Sun, God still resides in the details.
We gave that line to our mythical version of Jay Spry, who was the rewrite man.
What's the first rule of rewrite, Spry?
Shoot it down. I'm an obsessive. Most good journalists are obsessive.
You say that 120 people were evacuated. You can't evacuate people.
And these are people who are very good with words.
The guy stinks. He's probably evacuated. What, he left and he came back? No, he shit himself.
My editor used to say, check the spelling of the name every time.
At the Baltimore Sun, we do not print people's names unless we have a middle initial.
All the conversations that I had when I was a young reporter were about whether my lead was any good.
I miss the rush of writing a deadline and putting it off and putting it off and putting it off until you can't put it off anymore,
Scott?
5 minutes.
We're coming up on first edition.
3 minutes.
I worked for one summer at a legendary place called the City News Bureau of Chicago, and it was an old school crime and fire reporting consortium. They said if your mother tells you she loves you, check it out. And if you said the person was in the hospital in stable condition, they'd say, stable's not a condition, dead people are stable.
Writers, be it Jimmy Breslin at the Daily News when he was there, or Nat Hentoff, who's one of the few guys still around with The Voice, they're bringing years of authority. So when they make a pronouncement or they make an observation, they're bringing the history of the city with them.
He feared and hated me. I merely wanted him dead.
You can mention a guy to me today, and I'll think of 3 things that he said in the newsroom that made me laugh until I cried, There's a lot of cameos of Baltimore Sun people that we've put in there. Near and dear to us and our heroes and our colleagues, and there's a lot of love in this depiction.
Action, Clark.
For once, people, I am assured that the resources we need to work this story are going to be there for us. So let's surround this mess and report the hell out of it.
We're living through a crisis of the American newspaper. Everybody who works in a newsroom understands that. The circulation of newspapers is declining, and the advertising and revenue base of newspapers are declining.
Capital moves where capital can make most of its money. So if the newspaper industry isn't going to make its capital, then those stockholders will take their money somewhere else.
We have no responsibility except to the bottom line, to the price per share. That's America.
It's not like they're losing money. They're just not making as much as they'd like to.
That source of capital that creates new investment, new plants, expansion of newsrooms doesn't exist anymore.
It's economics. You need fewer writers to pay, less health insurance, less pencils. Just the economics of scale begin to crush individual voices in mainstream media.
I'm a federal reporter, remember? We haven't had daily city court coverage since Doug Struck took the buyout before last. You want one reporter covering 2 courthouses? Fine. Why don't you just shove the broom up my ass and I'll sweep the floor while I'm at it?
Reporters are working in a tougher and tougher economic environment.
Not to be all petulant on your special day here, but since when does a prosecutor in this town stage a perp walk and not call the daily newspaper?
Sort of the reduction of the news hole, the reduction of resources, of reporters that you can throw at a story. It's not a good thing for the American public. Competition among newspapers is good, and it's always good to have a solid reporting staff playing watchdog to the government.
Now, whoever leaked that shit to Carcetti's camp, they lied on us.
Nothing else comes out about that murder until after the primary.
It's remarkable to me how you can find pundits and spinners and spokespeople 24/7, and you know they're just going to spin it in the direction of whoever they're speaking for.
Politicians and the media feed off each other. Politicians can't exist without the media at all, and the media is dependent, although not exclusively, on politics for stories.
That moral ambiguity that we've explored in City Hall extends in the media, because whoever controls the media is the one that controls the power.
I see newspaper reporters as sort of fighters on the front line. They're in battle. They're trying to do what they do in an increasingly hostile environment.
Someone like me who deals with Iraq most weeks or healthcare or serious issues, I'm a lost leader.
That poor guy. You want to take him home with you?
I'm entirely depressed about the state of my craft. Newspapers and magazines are losing readers. Younger people aren't reading them. You know, I watch as my colleagues get laid off and fired. It's kind of like being gay in 1982. Half the people I know are dying. They're being cut off.
It's a bad time for newspapers, as you all know.
And that's reality. That's what would happen in most newsrooms. Newsrooms are very open places. There's no walls. There are no cubicles for the most part. So when somebody emerges, the top editors have offices, but when they emerge from their offices, they stand up on a desk and everyone gathers around and they make their announcement.
So it is with tremendous regret that I tell you that Chicago has made it clear that the bureaus in Beijing, Jerusalem, Johannesburg, and London will all be shuttered.
You stand there with your fellow colleagues and you, because we're all opinionated people anyway, we make comments to each other about what we're hearing.
First the LA Times buys us up, then the Tribune. Law of the fish. With a minnow.
At The Voice, when I was there, and I guess in the late 90s, there was a moment when a lot of the people who were The Voice were basically purged.
The problems haven't gotten any smaller. And what needed to be covered and addressed and monitored by that institution hasn't gotten smaller.
How come there's cuts in the newsroom when the company's still profitable?
There's nobody that feels worse about this than I do.
If you're of a certain age, you're offered a buyout. Sometimes you're more than offered it. You're told to take it, or you're hinted that if you don't take it, that you're making a mistake.
Some of you will migrate into new positions.
The buyouts, at least at the Baltimore Sun, have been going on for a number of years. It would be, of course, against labor law for the management to get employees to walk the plank, but, you know, there are ways to make that happen.
Without being explicit, they gave me a choice.
I have friends who still were working at the Baltimore Sun and trying to do a good job and trying to put out a quality product, and they are demoralized. And the fat bastards at the Chicago Tribune Company couldn't care less.
Have a seat.
I took the second of what I think now is about 6 or 7 buyouts. I left with great ambivalence because I very much enjoyed my time in the newsroom. And I very much thought it mattered on some vague level. I don't know why, but I did.
You need to have a larger group of journalists working together and feeding off of each other and being jealous of each other and fighting over stories and coming up with different angles.
If I think something about a story, I'm going to speak on it. You know what a healthy newsroom is? It's a magical place where people argue about everything all the time.
The more our forces are reduced, the less we have that, critical mass.
They create the perception that they're covering news, but they don't have the grunts on the ground to really get the news.
If you look at the Chicago Tribune, the Baltimore Sun, the Los Angeles Times, great papers, they are absolutely cutting into muscle. But the reality is that their economic base is shrinking.
It's more profitable these days to run a worse paper for less money. Cut back people in pages, you increase revenue.
There used to be 2 TV critics at our paper, now there is 1. And that's not an unfamiliar situation, both at the paper and across the media.
Additional cutbacks are said to be coming in the city MTA routes. The truth is, we're following the Daily Record on this.
We've been without a transpo reporter since the last round of buyouts.
Simply have to do more with less.
That's bullshit. You know, nobody ever does more with less. You do less with less. That's what happens.
Well, the phrasing that I was given was be more selective, which is basically the same as more with less.
Somebody 2 years out of J school who's willing to take a smaller salary is probably not going to be able to cover a beat the same as somebody who spent 10, 12, 14 years developing sources and is covering the hell out of that beat.
What do you know about Daniels?
Who is he? As they lay off reporters, as they diminish what they cover in their own communities, they're laying the groundwork for a lot of tragedy.
There's so much pressure to make short-term financial gains or stem losses that eventually people are going to be putting out an inferior product, and there's less reason to buy the newspaper. Therefore, there's less money coming in, so you're laying off more people. Therefore, there's even less reason to buy the newspaper, et cetera, et cetera.
Someday, I want to find out what it feels like to work for a real newspaper.
And the internet is a free source of news and opinions. Advertising dollars continue to decline. Our circulation numbers are also down. Technology is driving distribution.
It's a reality of newspapering these days. I mean, as the newspapers try to reinvent themselves to stay alive.
How do you expect me to write this thing with your fucking fingers in my eyes?
I'll be honest, I spend time on the web, and I think the web's had a bigger impact than a lot of people give it credit for in terms of the news. So there's just so much information out there now.
How much more contempt do you have to show for your own product than to give it away for free on the internet?
I think it's quite colorful to say that you have contempt for your own product if you're giving it away for free. But I don't think it's actually a reality.
The people running the joints in the 90s really did make that mistake.
Our readers will be willing to pay for good reporting. But we haven't reached that point where we've convinced the readers of that. I think it's coming in the future, but for now, readers get a free ride.
Charging a lot for the web is not the solution. It doesn't produce a lot of money. It cuts down the readership, and in the end, it hurts the print paper rather than helping it.
You know, there's no stopping progress. The internet is here, we got to deal with it. But here's the impact it's had on journalism. It doesn't cost anything to be a blogger.
What you can say about the bloggers, they're adept at being commentators. They link to something where somebody has done the hard work of digging something out, and they acquire that for free.
But it costs an awful lot of money to hire a couple of investigative reporters who work 6 months on a story, don't produce anything for that 6 months, and finally, at the end of it, may or may not get the goods on a corrupt public official or an agency.
Spend some time with him.
What about the neighborhood speed, the homeless coverage?
You're covered. Take a couple weeks, see what you see, all right?
Those kind of investments that were just commonplace when I started in journalism aren't being made anymore.
Doing more with less. That's what we have to contemplate going forward.
The problem is an economic problem. If the web were making up all of the lost income from shrinking ad revenue and shrinking circulation at the print newspapers, I don't think anybody would have a problem with it.
What the hell is so important about that damn paper?
Our audience has told us that they expect news to be free. And if you want to charge for it, what you're really saying is that we'll let you go somewhere else for your news.
You need to find other ways to make money without actually charging for page views. You know, web advertising is still the wild, wild west.
We're still looking for a business model in the newspaper industry that works.
Everyone in this room has done excellent work and should be proud of their contributions.
Every newspaper made the mistake of thinking the internet was advertising for their product. It wasn't. The storytelling was the product. Those readers who learned to take their news off the internet never came back.
What is this series about in a sentence? What's the budget line?
Season 5 of The Wire has its usual complications.
Well, I'm not sure how much to say about that without giving too much of it away.
What is it about this year?
To me, the key question of this season is,
how does the media affect the cop world, the drug world, the world of Baltimore?
Hey, Mr. Slotman, read it and weep.
That's an explosive season.
power. Price of the brick going up.
And money. I ain't cut out to be no CEO.
We're really going far left.
The truth is,
we cannot run this shit.
We're showing the power of media.
He does not get to win. We get to win.
Baltimore is knee-deep in blood.
I'm going to jail behind this shit.
There's no going back from here.
You tell every last one that I do not fall alone.
It's Baltimore. No one lives forever.
It's going to be very shocking.
No doubt.
The stakes become that much higher.
It's going to be crazy. Too real. Over the top. Phenomenal. It's hot.
You don't want to miss it.